Why you feel out of control when playing the saxophone? This is actually extremely common. Once again, this is not one which came from me, it came from one of my students. So one of the big problems which a lot of people have is they do feel out of control when playing the saxophone. And this is inconsistency. In other words, you seem to play very well in practice, but when it comes to a performance, you can't play. Day to day, the nature of your performance wavers. The idea of practicing slow you've done, but it doesn't give you consistent performance. Now, this is a problem, and the reason why it's a problem is because your teachers guessed it. There's actually very clear research on why and how this happens, and more importantly, the issue has got to do with one word, which sounds strange. It's called retrieval. What it means is that everything in music is based on memory, especially improvisation, playing songs from memory, playing folk melodies, and all those riffs and other stuff you see saxophonists doing. It's based on memory. And there are two ways of getting memory. And unfortunately, we're in a system in which praise is the most dead, terrible way of doing it, and that is extreme repetition. In other words, if you repeat things over and over and over again in the same way, in the same sequence, you will get it. Problem with extreme repetition, particularly for music, is that it takes a very long time. This is the reason why you get the story that you must start when you're 5 or 6, for violinists mainly, right? And you must practice, every single day for many hours a day before you can get a level of proficiency in order for you to be part of a philharmonic orchestra. Saxophonists, that doesn't work for us. The majority of saxophonists start as teenagers, but they said to be this mysterious period. It's spoken about with Charlie Parker, it's spoken about in Saxophone Colossus, Sonny Rollins, where you practice and practice and practice for a long period of time and things just click. Now, this makes no sense. This is voodoo. This is mystery. This is ridiculousness. But we believe these things. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that we don't practice correctly. This sounds ridiculous, but let's relate it to something sports. Would you expect a marathon runner to be able to get into the Olympic team if he did not run every day? No, you wouldn't. But how he runs is important. Because if he's never run a marathon before and he attempts to run a marathon on the first day, he can do extreme damage to his body, damage which actually could be crippling. He may never run properly again. Yet we expect that we are able to practice on a higher level without a detailed plan. And by detailed, I mean a blueprint, similar to the blueprint or plans you use to build a house. So this is what leads to this issue of you being out of control in your saxophone. The majority of amateur players come to play the saxophone without knowing what they're going to do. And they have a whole lot of stupidness which has been taught them. For instance, you play scales because you were told to. Scales don't work. And I'm adamant on this statement. Scales don't work. And by saying this, scales do not work in the way the majority of saxophonists and saxophone players play them. They don't work. So we're told to go through a sequence of practice which we do not understand. There's no rhyme or meaning to it. Then we become mad when it doesn't give us the results we want. Practicing is a skill. And it's actually an extremely important skill. In fact, I go as far to say the only leverageable skill which you have as an adult is the ability to practice better than the next person. The better you are at practicing, the better your results are on the saxophone. It's that simple. Everything else will come to naught if you don't understand how to practice properly. But let's go back to this out of control issue. The biggest problem with the out of control issue is simple. It's retrieval. In other words, you cannot retrieve what you believe you've learned before. That's because you don't have a proper retrieval strategy. And retrieval simply means, how many times have you thought of a person's name which is on the tip of your tongue? Kenny, oh yeah, G, right? So all that comes down to the fact that you can't retrieve. And the reason you can't retrieve is because it wasn't encoded or stored in your memory properly in the first place. I've learned this quite much to my chagrin, particularly since I teach a lot of popular songs and I teach people how to play music properly, much to my horror. The majority of people come to me saying that they know a song, don't know it. Because when I ask them to play it, the song they're playing is very different from how I understand the song, which is understandable. Many extremely popular songs have different versions. As I've said previously, the version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, which we have learnt as adults and children, is not Mozart's version. Mozart's version has a little adjustment in the final 2 bars. So immediately you have this problem that you believe you have learned something in a particular way, but this is not the way you actually learned it, which means when you come to retrieve it, you retrieve what you actually learned and you are disappointed. And this gap, it's almost like a cognitive distortion gap, is a difference between what you think was learned and what is learned is actually extremely common. Like your car keys. You think you know where your car keys are, but you can't find them. I was looking for my torch. I thought I knew where I put my torch. It turned out I put it in a different place. Now, that's because there is no proper storage, encoding, and retrieval strategy, right? This goes down to practicing and practicing properly and efficiently. A second big mistake here with this is the issue of time. The one thing we leverage is the one thing which we shouldn't leverage. This is just the truth. So, in other words, the thing which is the most perishable, the most precious to us, is the thing which we leverage all the time as musicians. And this thing is time. How many times have you been told it's only a matter of time before you get good? How many times have you been told a story which goes something like, oh, if you practice for many years, you'll get good? Rubbish. Absolute hogwash. The reason why it's hogwash is very simple. Time has nothing to do with how you learn the saxophone. It doesn't. What it has to do with, more importantly, is do you understand what you're doing? In fact, we have proof of accelerating methods of learning the saxophone. You could actually learn entire songs, right, in a year. In other words, you could have a proficiency of almost a master jazz musician in 1 year, which takes someone 10 to 20 years. The reason why is you're leveraging proper techniques. In other words, it's accelerated learning. You know what you're practicing in a certain way, your sequence is correct, your timings are correct. So forget about time. Time is deceptive. Every time someone tells you, oh, it's only a matter of time, they're being lazy. In other words, that person is simply telling you, I don't understand how learning the saxophone works. I understand how to play the saxophone myself, but I really do not understand how to get you there. And time is a wonderful excuse. The reason why is that if a person still hasn't got there, what do you tell them? Put in more time. That's rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Do not fall for the time excuse. Now, in this particular one, I have a worksheet at the bottom. You may have noticed in other videos I didn't, but this one I do. And in this worksheet, I want you to put down how you practice. It's not a small question, by the way. Just put down how you practice. And this worksheet can be accessed in my group, right? So go to the One Song Challenge group and actually go through the sheet and post how you practice there. I'm constantly in and out of the group several times a day, moderating and giving advice to people. So I look forward to seeing you there. And remember that you're not alone in this thing of feeling you're out of control when you play the saxophone. There are many methods and strategies which can be used to get you to the point where you're in absolute control every time you touch the horn. So I'm happy to be here with you and I hope you've enjoyed this. So make sure you go and play your sax now.